entertainment purposes only, and speaks of Eärendil's journeying to Valinor and the ending of the First Age with the War of Wrath, as written in chapter 24 of the Silmarillion, which concludes, "And he entered into the streets of Tirion, and they were empty, and his heart was heavy, for he feared that some evil had come even to the blessed realm. He walked in the deserted ways of Tirion, and the dust upon his raiment and his shoes was a dust of diamonds, and he shone and glistened as he climbed the long white stairs. And he called aloud in many tongues, both of elves and men, but there were none to answer him. Therefore he turned back at last towards the sea. But even as he took the shoreward road, one stood upon the hill and called to him in a great voice, crying, Hail, Eärendil of mariners most renowned, the looked-for that cometh at unawares, the longed-for that cometh beyond hope. Hail, Eärendil, bearer of light before the sun and moon, splendor of the children of earth, star in the darkness, jewel in the sunset, radiant in the morning." That voice was the voice of Eonwe, herald of Manwe, and he came from Valimar, and summoned Eärendil to come before the powers of Arda. And Eärendil went into Valinor and to the halls of Valimar, and never again set foot upon the lands of men. Then the Valar took counsel together, and they summoned Ulmo from the deeps of the sea, and Eärendil stood before their faces and delivered the errand of the two kindreds. And pardon he asked for the Noldor, and pity for their great sorrows, and mercy upon men and elves, and succor in their need. And his prayer was granted. It is told among the elves that after Eärendil had departed, seeking Elwing his wife, Mandos spoke concerning his fate. And he said, Shall mortal man step living upon the undying lands, and yet live? But Ulmo said, For this he was born into the world, and say unto me, Whether is he Eärendil Tuor, son of the line of Hador, or the son of Idril, Turgon's daughter of the elven house of Finwë? And Mandos answered, Equally the Noldor, who went wilfully into exile, may not return hither. But when all was spoken, Manwe gave judgment, and he said, In this matter the power of doom is given to me. The peril that he ventured for love of the two kindreds shall not fall upon Eärendil, nor shall it fall upon Elwing his wife, who entered into peril for love of him. But they shall not walk again ever among elves or men in the outer lands. And this is my decree concerning them. To Eärendil and to Elwing and to their sons shall be given leave each to choose freely to which kindred their fates shall be joined, and under which kindred they shall be judged. Now, when Eärendil was a long time gone, Elwing became lonely and afraid, and wandering by the margin of the sea, she came near to Alqualond, where lay the Telerin fleets. There the Teleri befriended her, and they listened to her tales of Doriath and Gondolin and the griefs of Beleriand, and they were filled with pity and wonder. And there Eärendil returning found her at the haven of the swans. But ere long they were summoned to Valimar, and there the decree of the elder king was declared to them. Then Eärendil said to Elwing, Choose thou, for now I am weary of the world. And Elwing chose to be judged among the firstborn children of Iluvatar because of Luthien, and for her sake Eärendil chose alike, though his heart was rather with the kindred of men and the people of his father. Then at the bidding of the Valar, Eonwe went to the shore of Aman, where the companions of Eärendil still remained, awaiting tidings. And he took a boat, and the 3 mariners were set therein, and the Valar drove them away into the east with a great wind. But they took Vangilo, and hallowed it, and bore it away through Valinor to the uttermost rim of the world. And there it passed through the door of night, and was lifted up even into the oceans of heaven. Now fair and marvelous was that vessel made, and it was filled with a wavering flame, pure and bright. And Eärendil the mariner sat at the helm, glistening with dust of elven gems, and the Silmaril was bound upon his brow. Far he journeyed in that ship, even into the starless voids, but most often was he seen at morning or at evening, glimmering in sunrise or sunset, as he came back to Valinor from voyages beyond the confines of the world. On those journeys Elwing did not go, for she might not endure the cold and the pathless voids, and she loved rather the earth and the sweet winds that blow on sea and hill. Therefore there was built for her a white tower northward upon the borders of the sundering seas, and thither at times all the sea-birds of the earth repaired. and it is said that Elwing learned the tongues of birds, who herself had once worn their shape, and they taught her the craft of flight, and her wings were of white and silver grey. And at times, when Eärendil returning drew near again to Arda, she would fly to meet him, even as she had flown long ago when she was rescued from the sea. Then the far-sighted among the elves that dwelt in the lonely isle would see her like a white bird, shining, rose-stained in the sunset, as she soared in joy to greet the coming of Vengilo to haven. Now when first Vengilo was set to sail in the seas of heaven, it rose unlocked fore, glittering and bright, and the people of Middle-earth beheld it from afar and wondered, and they took it for a sign, and called it Gilestel, the star of high hope. And when this new star was seen at evening, Maedhros spoke to Maglor his brother, and he said, "Surely that is the Silmaril that shines now in the west." And Maglor answered, "If it be truly the Silmaril, which we saw cast into the sea that rises again by the power of the Valar, then let us be glad, for its glory is seen now by many, and is yet secure from all evil." Then the elves looked up and despaired no longer, but Morgoth was filled with doubt. Yet it is said that Morgoth looked not for the assault that came upon him from the west, for so great was his pride become that he deemed that none would ever again come with open war against him. Moreover, he thought that he had forever estranged the Noldor from the lords of the west, and that, content in their blissful realm, the Valar, would heed no more his kingdom in the world without. For to him that is pitiless the deeds of pity are ever strange and beyond reckoning. But the host of the Valar prepared for battle, and beneath their white banners marched the Vanyar, the people of Ingwe, and those also of the Noldor, who never departed from Valinor, whose leader was Finarfin, the son of Finwë. Few of the Teleri were willing to go forth to war, for they remembered the slaying at the Swanhaven and the rape of their ships. But they hearkened to Elwing, who was the daughter of Dior-Eluchiel, and come of their own kindred, and they sent mariners enough to sail the ships that bore the host of Valinor east over the sea. Yet they stayed aboard their vessels, and none of them set foot upon the hither lands. Of the march of the host of the Valar to the north of Middle-earth little is said in any tale, for among them went none of those elves who had dwelt and suffered in the hither lands, and who made the histories of those days that still are known. And tidings of these things they only learned long afterwards from their kinsfolk in Aman. But at the last the might of Valinor came up out of the west, and the challenge of the trumpets of Yonwe filled the sky, and Beleriand was ablaze with the glory of their arms, for the host of the Valar were arrayed in forms young and fair and terrible, and the mountains rang beneath their feet. The meeting of the hosts of the west and of the north is named the Great Battle, and the War of Wrath. And there was marshalled the whole power of the throne of Morgoth, and it had become great beyond count, so that Anfauglith could not contain it. And all the north was aflame with war, but it availed him not. The Belrogs were destroyed, save some few that fled and hid themselves in caverns inaccessible at the roots of the earth, and the uncounted legions of the Auras perished like straw in a great fire, or were swept like shriveled leaves before a burning wind. Few remained to trouble the world for long years after, and such few as were left of the three houses of the elf friends, fathers of men, fought upon the part of the Valar, and they were avenged in those days for Baragund and Barahir, Galdor and Gundor, Hor and Húrin, and many others of their lords. But a great part of the sons of men, whether of the people of Uldor or others new come out of the east, marched with the enemy, and the elves do not forget it. Then seeing that his hosts were overthrown and his power dispersed, Morgoth quailed, and he dared not to come forth himself. But he loosed upon his foes the last desperate assault that he had prepared, and out of the pits of Angband there issued the winged dragons that had not before been seen. And so sudden and ruinous was the onset of that dreadful fleet that the host of the Valar was driven back, for the coming of the dragons was with great thunder and lightning and a tempest of fire. But Eärendil came shining with white flame, and about Vingilo were gathered all the great birds of heaven, and Thorondor was their captain. And there was battle in the air all the day, and through a dark night of doubt. Before the rising of the sun, Eärendil slew Encalagan the Black, the mightiest of the dragon host, and cast him from the sky, and he fell upon the towers of Thangorodrim, and they were broken in his ruin. Then the sun rose, and the host of the Valar prevailed, and well nigh all the dragons were destroyed, and all the pits of Morgoth were broken and unroofed, and the might of the Valar descended into the deeps of the earth. There Morgoth stood at last at bay, and yet unvaliant. He fled into the deepest of his mines, and sued for peace and pardon. But his feet were hewn from under him, and he was hurled upon his face. Then he was bound with the chain Angainor which he had worn aforetime, and his iron crown they beat into a collar for his neck, and his head was bowed upon his knees, and the two Silmarils which remained to Morgoth were taken from his crown. And they shone unsullied beneath the sky, and Eonwe took them, and guarded them. Thus an end was made of the power of Angband in the north, and the evil realm was brought to naught. And out of the deep prisons a multitude of slaves came forth beyond all hope into the light of day, and they looked upon a world that was changed. For so great was the fury of those adversaries, that the northern regions of the western world were rent asunder, and the sea roared in through many chasms, and there was confusion and great noise, and rivers perished or found new paths, and the valleys were upheaved, and the hills trod down, and Sirion was no more. Then Eonwe, as herald of the elder king, summoned the elves of Beleriand to depart from Middle-earth. But Maedhros and Maglor would not hearken, and they prepared, though now with weariness and loathing, to attempt in despair the fulfillment of the oath, for they would have given battle for the Silmarils were they withheld, even against the victorious host of Valinor, even though they stood alone against all the world. And they sent a message, therefore, to Eonwe, bidding him yield up now those jewels which of old Fëanor their father made, and Morgoth stole from him. But Eonwe answered that the right to the work of their father, which the sons of Fëanor formerly possessed, had now perished because of their many and merciless deeds, being blinded by their oath, and most of all because of their slaying of Dior and the assault upon the havens. The light of the Silmarils should go now into the west, whence it came in the beginning, and to Valinor must Maedhros and Maglor return, and there abide the judgment of the Valar, by whose decree alone would Eonwe yield the jewels from his charge. Then Maglor desired indeed to submit, for his heart was sorrowful, and he said, "The oath says not that we may not bide our time, and it may be that in Valinor all shall be forgiven and forgot, and we shall come into our own in peace." But Maedhros answered that if they returned to Aman, but the favor of the Valar were withheld from them, then their oath would still remain, but its fulfillment be beyond all hope. And he said, "Who can tell to what dreadful doom we shall come, if we disobey the powers in their own land, or purpose ever to bring war again into their holy realm?" Yet Maglor still held back, saying, "If Manwë and Vardar themselves deny the fulfillment of an oath to which we named them in witness, is it not made void?" And Maedhros answered, "But how shall our voices reach to Ilúvatar beyond the circles of the world? And by Ilúvatar we swore in our madness, and called the everlasting darkness upon us. If we kept not our word, who shall release us?" "If none can release us," said Maglor, "then indeed the everlasting darkness shall be our lot, whether we keep our oath or break it. But less evil shall we do in the breaking." Yet he yielded at last to the will of Maedhros, and they took counsel together how they should lay hands on the Silmarils. And they disguised themselves, and came in the night to the camp of Eonwe, and crept into the place where the Silmarils were guarded, and they slew the guards, and laid hands on the jewels. Then all the camp was raised against them, and they prepared to die, defending themselves until the last. But Eonwe would not permit the slaying of the sons of Fëanor, and departing unfought they fled far away. Each of them took to himself a Silmaril, for they said, "Since one is lost to us, and but two remain, and we two alone of our brothers, so is it plain that fate would have us share the heirlooms of our father." But the jewel burned the hand of Maedhros in pain unbearable, and he perceived that it was as Eonwe had said, and that his right thereto had become void, and that the oath was vain, and being in anguish and despair, he cast himself into a gaping chasm filled with fire, and so ended. And the Silmaril that he bore was taken into the bosom of the earth. And it is told of Maglor that he could not endure the pain with which the Silmaril tormented him. And he cast it at last into the sea, and thereafter he wandered ever upon the shores, singing in pain and regret beside the waves. For Maglor was mighty among the singers of old, named only after Daron of Doriath, but he came never back among the people of the elves. And thus it came to pass that the Silmarils found their long homes, one in the airs of heaven, and one in the fires of the heart of the world, and one in the deep waters. In those days there was a great building of ships upon the shores of the western sea, and thence in many a fleet the Eldar set sail into the west, and came never back to the lands of weeping and of war. And the Vanyar returned beneath their white banners, and were borne in triumph to Valinor. But their joy and victory was diminished, for they returned without the Silmarils from Morgoth's crown. And they knew that those jewels could not be found or brought together again unless the world be broken and remade. And when they came into the west, the elves of Beleriand dwelt upon Tol Eressëa, the lonely isle, that looks both west and east, whence they might come even to Valinor. They were admitted again to the love of Manwë and the pardon of the Valar, and the Teleri forgave their ancient grief, and the curse was laid to rest. Yet not all the Eldalie were willing to forsake the hither lands where they had long suffered and long dwelt, and some lingered many an age in Middle-earth. Among those were Círdan the shipwright and Celeborn of Doriath, with Galadriel his wife, who alone remained of those who led the Noldor to exile in Beleriand. In Middle-earth dwelt also Gil-galad the High King, and with him was Elrond half-elven, who chose, as was granted to him, to be numbered among the Eldar. But Elros his brother chose to abide with men, and from these brethren alone has come among men the blood of the firstborn and a strain of the spirits divine that were before Arda. For they were the sons of Elwing, Dior's daughter, Lúthien's son, child of Thingol and Melian. And Eärendil, their father, was the son of Idril Celebrindil, Turgon's daughter of Gondolin. But Morgoth himself, the Valar, thrust through the door of night beyond the walls of the world, into the timeless void. And a guard is set forever on those walls, and Eärendil keeps watch upon the ramparts of the sky. Yet the lies that Melkor, the mighty and accursed, Morgoth Boglir, the power of terror and of hate, sowed in the hearts of elves and men, are a seed that does not die and cannot be destroyed. And ever and anon it sprouts anew, and will bear dark fruit even unto the latest days. Here ends the Silmarillion. If it has passed from the high and the beautiful to darkness and ruin, that was of old the fate of Arda Mared. And if any change shall come and the marring be amended, Manwë and Varda may know, but they have not revealed it, and it is not declared as the dooms of Mandos.